Okay, so we're starting a new course this evening, and it's important that we have a really positive motivation for joining this course. And even if you only do this one session tonight and then don't come back, but still, it's an opportunity to create a vast amount of merit listening to the teachings. So we do need to make sure we have a really strong altruistic motivation for being here. So we'll start by doing the prayers and then take a few more minutes to generate the ideal motivation, the most positive motivation. So while reciting the prayers of refuge and so on, it's good if you can to imagine the Buddha in the space in front. The whole visualization made of light, transparent and radiant and very beautiful. And also emanating the qualities of enlightenment, universal compassion, love, being completely dedicated to the welfare of all living beings throughout space, and wisdom and patience and so on. So all the positive qualities that have been fully developed and fully perfected in the mind of a Buddha. So it's good if you can feel you're in the presence of someone who has those qualities constantly, every minute, every second, 24/7. And you can also think this image of the Buddha embodies all Buddhas and all objects of refuge, all the root and lineage gurus and Idams and Bodhisattvas and Arhats, Aryas, and the Dharma, true paths and true cessations in their minds, and the Sangha, especially the Arya Sangha. So imagine all objects of refuge embodied in this figure of the Buddha, and feel it's not like a painting or a statue, but like real life Buddha. Really try to feel you're in the Buddha's presence, and then maintain that visualization and that feeling as we recite the prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nirataya. Now we'll recite the mantra of the Buddha 7 times. While reciting it, you can imagine light flowing from the Buddha's form in the space in front of you and filling your body completely, filling your body and your mind and purifying all sickness and negative karma and obscurations. So all negative things in the body and mind are purified. And the light also nourishes our positive potential, all our good qualities, so that they can grow more and more, turn into realizations, and bring us closer to the state of a Buddha ourselves. Hayata Om Mune Mune Maha Manaye Soha Tayata 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 Om Mune Maha Manaye Soha Tayata Mune Maha Manaye Soha. So if you find it helpful, you can continue imagining the Buddha there in the space in front of you for the remainder of our time together. We are here to learn the Buddha's teachings so that we can integrate them into our minds, into our lives, so that we can gradually develop the same knowledge and qualities and realizations the Buddha himself has, and become a Buddha ourselves one day for the benefit of all beings. So take a few moments to do the best you can to generate that motivation of wanting to learn these teachings so that you can actualize them, make them part of your mind, and in that way progress on the path that culminates in the state of full enlightenment, Buddhahood. And the reason for doing this isn't for your own benefit alone. Of course, we will benefit by doing this, but the real reason for following the path to enlightenment and becoming enlightened is so that we can benefit all living beings. So we have received an enormous amount of kindness from each and every sentient being. They have all been our mothers and fathers and providers of all of our enjoyments and necessities, food, clothes, shelter, and so on, and friendship. And they've been our children as well, so we've loved them dearly. So stretching back into our past lives, if we could remember all of our past lives, then we would have an understanding of this, how we've been deeply connected, intimately connected with each and every living being and received so much benefit from them. And so it's only right that we appreciate their kindness, wish to repay their kindness. And this is the best way to do that, is by developing our potential for enlightenment, becoming enlightened, and then working for the benefit of all other beings, helping them become free of suffering, helping them develop their potential for enlightenment, and eventually become enlightened as well. So in whatever way works for you, generate that motivation of wanting to benefit all living beings, wanting to become enlightened, to help all living beings, and making that your motivation for participating in this session tonight. Okay, so we are starting a new course tonight. It's part of the basic program, one of the modules of the basic program, and it's on chapter 4 of the Ornament for Clear Realizations. And so recently, starting in April through July, I taught a course for Thupten Norbu Ling on the 70 topics. Those are the main topics explained in that text, the Ornament for Clear Realization. And probably most of you did attend that course. So during that, I gave introduction to the Ornament, background information to the Ornament. I also gave a kind of overview of the 8 chapters, what's contained in the 8 chapters, and then a little bit about each of the 70 topics. And this present course we're starting tonight is meant to be only about chapter 4. So what I'll do tonight is I'll just give a brief overview of the Ornament and the 8 chapters, and then we'll focus on chapter 4. And specifically, what I'm going to do in this course is focus on the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, which are explained in that chapter. So I'm going to be spending most of the time in this course talking about those. So anyone who didn't attend the previous course on the 70 topics, you're welcome to go back and watch and listen to those talks, at least the first few, because the first few explain more about the ornament, this text. But I will talk a little bit about it tonight. So if we could have the slides on the screen. Okay. Good. Okay. So just a few facts about the ornament. When you see the ornament, it means the ornament for clear realizations. And this is one of 5 texts by Maitreya. So the Tibetans consider that this text was composed by Maitreya Buddha. I've heard that in other traditions, there are different opinions about who Maitreya is, whether he's a Buddha or an Indian scholar. So it's hard to know for sure who was Maitreya, but the Tibetans believe it's Maitreya Buddha. And according to the Tibetan tradition, the story behind this text, you've probably heard this story, is that a Sangye was one of the Nalanda masters. He lived in the 4th century in India. And he had been trying to understand the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras by the Buddha and was having difficulty. And he had this idea that if he went into retreat, his hope was to meet Maitreya, who's the next Buddha to come, and that he could consult Maitreya and get explanation on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So it's kind of a long story. He spent 12 years in all meditating in this cave, but failed to see Maitreya until he finally kind of, in a discouraged state of mind, he left the cave, was walking back down to town, and he saw this dog that had a horrible wound on its body, and there were maggots in the wound, kind of eating the dog alive. And he felt this enormous sense of compassion. He wanted to help the dog. He also wanted to help the worms or the maggots. He didn't want to harm them. And so he had this idea. I think one account says he actually cut off some of his own flesh, and then he was going to transfer the maggots from the dog to that piece of flesh from his body. And he thought to do it with his tongue to not hurt them. And so he's reaching forward to remove these maggots with his tongue, and he closed his eyes because it looked horrible. And then suddenly there was nothing there, and he opened his eyes and there was Maitreya Buddha. So, and then, he said, hey, where have you been? I've been trying to meet you all these years. You didn't show up. And Maitreya said, I was with you the whole time. You just couldn't see me because you had obscurations in your mind. But because of this act of compassion, this great compassion that came up and, motivated him to try to help the dog and the maggots, that purified his mind enough that he was able to see Maitreya. And thereafter, Maitreya took a Sangye with him to Shita heaven and gave him teachings and gave him these 5 texts, one of which is the Ornament for Clear Realizations. So this is considered one of the most important texts, at least in the Gelugpa tradition. Probably at the other Tibetan traditions as well, study it. In the Gelugpa monasteries, it's usually the first main text that they study, and they spend between 6 and 7 years just studying this one text. And it'll become clear in a moment why it's so important. So the second bullet point says, it explains the hidden or implicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which are the vast practices and realizations of bodhisattvas. So the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are very important sutras in the Mahayana tradition. And they're difficult to understand. If you just sit down and read them, it's quite hard to understand the meaning. But there are a number of different Perfection of Wisdom sutras of varying lengths. Like the longest one is 100,000 verses, and then there's shorter ones, and then the Heart Sutra is an example of a Perfection of Wisdom sutra that we're all familiar with. That's one of the shortest ones. And overall, the main explicit or obvious topic or subject of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras is wisdom, the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, the true nature of all things. So that's mainly what they talk about. But again, it's difficult to understand the meaning just by reading the sutras. So later Indian scholars wrote commentaries to clarify the meaning. So Nagarjuna, who lived about 400 years after the Buddha, he wrote a number of texts elucidating this explicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. In other words, emptiness. So Nagarjuna, and then followers of him, Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, Shantideva. So those are some of the lamas in the Indian tradition who wrote commentaries to explain, to clarify the explicit, obvious meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, which is the topic of emptiness. And but then there's also a hidden meaning or implicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And that isn't as obvious, but it's there in between the lines, you might say. And so that is the actual path of the bodhisattva, how a bodhisattva practices and progresses along the path, gains realizations, and eventually reaches enlightenment. And so, for example, the development of bodhicitta and the practice of the 6 perfections. So that's also included in the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, but in a more hidden way. And so that's actually what Sangye was trying to figure out when he was reading the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. He was trying to understand this hidden meaning, and was having difficulty. And so Maitreya helped him by giving him teachings and giving him these texts. And so the ornament belongs to that side of the path, the side of the path that it's sometimes called the vast or the extensive. It's the side of the path that explains, the method side of the path, how to cultivate compassion and love and bodhicitta and then practice the 6 perfections and actually progress to enlightenment. So as you probably heard, we need both sides of the path. We need the wisdom side and we need the method side, like the 2 wings of a bird. And so both of those are contained in the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, but there was a need for Indian masters to write commentaries to clarify, to bring out and explain these 2 sides, these 2 aspects of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And so over time, there were these 2 lineages, Nagarjuna and so on, explaining the wisdom lineage, and then Sangye is credited with the side of the path explaining the vast, the extensive, the method side of the path. And eventually, both of these lineages came to Atisha, Lama Atisha. I mean, I'm sure there were many others who received both of those, but Lama Atisha in about the 9th century received both of those lineages of the profound and the vast. And then he came to Tibet. So he brought them with him to Tibet and combined them in the very first Lamrim text, which is called The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And so the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, that's the first Lamrim text, and it kind of brings together those 2 sides of the path, the profound and the vast. And so the ornament for clear realizations then is one of the you could say, one of the source texts or root texts for the Lamrim tradition, which, is kind of the main thing that we study and, in our tradition, the Gelugpa tradition, explaining all the stages of the path. The next bullet point, just the layout of the ornament, has 273 verses. So it's written in verse form, very short, succinct verses. And these are contained in 8 chapters. And just as the Perfection of Wisdom sutras are difficult to understand, so is the ornament. If you just sit down and read the root text of the ornament, you'll wonder, what is going on here? What is he talking about? And so it was necessary to have commentaries to bring out the meaning of the ornament. And so I don't know how many commentaries there were written in India altogether, but there were 21 Indian commentaries that were translated into Tibetan. So there may have been more that weren't translated into Tibetan, but in the Tibetan tradition, they have 21 commentaries by Indian masters. And of these commentaries, the Gelugpas mainly study one called the Commentary Clear Meaning by Haribhadra. They consider Haribhadra to be a very wise and accomplished master, and his commentaries are very clear. So they use that one. But yeah, if you trying to read Haribhadra's commentary, there are translations of it. It's also difficult to understand. And so then Tibetan masters also wrote commentaries. Lama Tsongkhapa, in fact, the very first text that Lama Tsongkhapa wrote, I think when he was around 30 years old, was a commentary to the Ornament for Clear Realizations. It's called the Golden Rosary or the Golden Garland. And that is translated into English by Gareth Sparham. And also Gyaltsab J, Lama Tsongkhapa's disciple, wrote a commentary. Yeah. So in the Gelugpa monasteries, when they study the ornament and usually Haribhadra's commentary, and then maybe Lama Tsongkhapa's, but I've heard they prefer Gyaltsab J's commentary. And then each college has their own textbooks. So like Sarah Monastery, where most of our teachers are from, they have commentaries by Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen. To further clarify the meaning, the hidden points. That's just a little bit of background about the ornament. And the next slide, just an overview of the 8 chapters and what's included in each of the 8 chapters. So the first chapter is about the exalted knower of all aspects. And that is another term for enlightenment or omniscient mind, Buddha's mind. That's actually the longest chapter in the whole text. And it's really fantastic. There's so many important topics in that chapter, such as the 4 truths, the 2 truths, bodhicitta, Buddha nature. Yeah, so like a lot of very important things are explained in that chapter. And then the second chapter, yeah, so there's 10 topics in chapter 1. And then chapter 2, the main subject is the knower of paths. And a knower of path is a realization in the mind of either a bodhisattva, an Arya bodhisattva, or a Buddha. So that's the main subject of that chapter. And there's 11 topics in chapter 2. Chapter 3 is called Knower of Bases, and a knower of bases is also a realization in the mind of an Arya. And if you're not familiar with the term Arya, an Arya is someone who's gained the direct realization of emptiness. So it's someone who's quite highly accomplished. And there's actually 4 types of Aryas. There's hearer Aryas. Hearers are those who are striving for nirvana. And then solitary realizers. They're solitary realizer Aryas. They were also striving for nirvana, but they usually spend more time on the path than do hearers. And then there's bodhisattva Aryas. So bodhisattvas are striving for full enlightenment Buddhahood. And so once they've gained the direct realization of emptiness, they become an Arya. And then there's Buddha Aryas. So Buddhas are also Aryas because they have the direct realization of emptiness too. So there's 4 types of Aryas. And so number 3, the knower bases, these are realizations in the mind of any type of Arya. So the ornament doesn't only talk about realizations of bodhisattvas, but also realizations of hearers and solitary realizers. So you also learn a lot about their paths and what they need to do in order to reach their goal of nirvana. So that chapter has 9 topics. And so those first 3 chapters, they're all about 3 types of knowers. They're sometimes called the 3 exalted knowers. So those are very important realizations that one needs to develop, especially bodhisattvas who wish to reach Buddhahood for the benefit of all living beings. And the next 4 chapters are all about different kinds of applications. And an application, the term application, is a practice of a bodhisattva, also called a yoga, a bodhisattva's yoga. But these are mental yogas, not like hatha yoga, physical yogas. And so they're practices that a bodhisattva does based on either calm abiding or a calm abiding and special insight, a union of calm abiding and special insight. So again, they're, pretty highly accomplished beings who can do these practices. And so these 4 applications are practices that bodhisattvas use to attain the first 3, those 3 exalted knowers explained in the first 3 chapters. Number 4 is called Application in Complete Aspects. So that's the chapter we're going to be looking at in this course. Aspect, we'll look at it more later, what it means, what is the meaning of the term aspect, but there's 173 aspects of the 3 exalted knowers, those first 3 realizations in the first 3 chapters. And so a bodhisattva needs to learn these 173 aspects and understand them, meditate on them, and gain proficiency, realizations of these different aspects. And this is what enables them to overcome the obscurations in the mind, the hindrances in the mind that prevent the mind from reaching enlightenment. And so this is a crucial, essential part of a bodhisattva's practice for the attainment of enlightenment. So there's application in complete aspects, and then number 5 is peak application, number 6 serial application, number 7 instantaneous application. I did explain more about these in the previous course on the 70 topics, so we won't go into it here. But just to know in general, there are 4 different kinds of practices a bodhisattva gains proficiency in on their way to enlightenment. And then number 8, the 8th chapter of the ornament is called Resultant Truth Body. And that's the goal. That's enlightenment, Buddhahood. And that has 4 topics. The 4 topics are the 4 bodies of a Buddha. And so we spent some time on that during the 70 topics class. So this the title of this text is Ornament for Clear Realization. And the term clear realization, when I was studying this in the master's program, we asked our teacher if there was, what exactly is a clear realization? And he said he didn't know a definition, but he said that it's a synonym of path and ground and exalted wisdom. And there is a definition for path. The definition of a path is a clear realizer conjoined with an uncontrived mind of renunciation, of definite emergence. And so we can just think of it in a simple term. It's a realization, and it has to be at least like the bottom line, the bare minimum is one has to have gained uncontrived renunciation. Uncontrived renunciation. So renunciation means seeing the nature of samsara as being totally unsatisfactory, being completely disillusioned with samsara, wanting to be free of samsara, not having any more interest in staying in samsara. So you've heard that explanation, renunciation, or sometimes called definite emergence, or the determination to be free. So that state of mind. So when, after meditating for a long time, when that state of mind arises naturally, spontaneously, effortlessly, that's the meaning of uncontrived renunciation. And that's like the minimum realization one needs to have to enter a path, to actually be on a path. In the case of bodhisattvas, on top of uncontrived renunciation, they also need uncontrived bodhicitta. So that's the point at which one becomes a bodhisattva and enters the bodhisattva path, when bodhicitta arises in a natural and effortless and uncontrived way. So that's like the starting point of having a path or a realization, a clear realization. And then from there on, there's many other realizations that one attains. So all of those would be clear realizations. And so, there's just a little footnote at the bottom, because sometimes these 8, the topics or the subjects of the 8 chapters, sometimes they're called 8 clear realizations. And that's a little problematic. The first seven are definitely clear realizations. But with number 8, the resultant truth body includes all the 4 bodies, all the 4 kayas. And not all the 4 kayas are actually clear realizations. In fact, only one of them is the exalted wisdom truth body, or the Dharmakaya, the Buddha's omniscient mind. So that is a clear realization. But the other kayas, like the 2 form bodies, those are not clear realizations. Those are form bodies. And then the other kaya is the nature body, and that's the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. And that's also not a clear realization. And so the resultant truth body, we can't say the whole thing is a clear realization. Only one of them is. And so to get around that problem, then these 8 can be called 8 categories rather than 8 clear realizations. So this is just kind of a technical point. But it's said that if you do want to call them 8 clear realizations, then for number 8, you have to call it the exalted wisdom truth body. You have to take out that one of the 4 kayas that is a clear realization and make that the title. Anyway, this is something that we discuss in the monastery, because what do we call these 8 things? Okay, so this is just, and for you who did the 70 topics course, this is just a review of the main topics, the main subjects included in the ornament. And the next slide, I I also explained this last time. This is just a sort of a nice, neat, tidy way. We could see the next slide. Of showing the relationship between the 8 categories, putting them into 3 groups. So the first group are 3 objects to be cultivated. Although it says 3 objects to be cultivated, they're actually minds, they're wisdoms, they're realizations, but they are things to be cultivated in the mind of a practitioner, a bodhisattva. So the exalted knower of all aspects, knower of paths, knower of bases. So these are the things to be developed, to be cultivated in the mind. And the 3 of them are called the 3 exalted knowers. So that term comes up quite a lot. And then the second category, or the second group, is 4 practices or methods for attaining those 3 exalted knowers. So those are the 4 applications explained in chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then the third is the final result, which is the resultant truth body, Buddhahood, with the 4 bodies, the 4 kayas. So in that way, we understand how they work together, how they all fit together. So again, in this course, we're going to zero in on chapter 4, which is on the application and complete aspects. And I heard that the reason Lama Zopa Rinpoche wanted this to be part of the basic program, he wanted study of the chapter 4 of the Ornament, is because in this chapter there's an explanation of the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, and he wanted students to learn the 37 harmonies. And I've heard that in some basic programs taught in some centers, the teacher, who's usually a geshe, will go through the entire 4th chapter and talk about all the 11 topics in detail and so on. But that would take a long time to do. And we don't have that much time. We have only 13 sessions in which to do this course. And so what I plan to do is to just focus on the 37 harmonies, since that is what Lama Zopa Rinpoche wanted students to learn. And these 37 are included in the first topic of chapter 4. And it's also practical. I mean, these are things that we can at least start practicing now, and they're very important. And by the way, just for the materials, I sent 3 files to Venerable Dundrup to put on the material page for this course. So one file is an extract of Jetsun Shoki Geltsen's text on the ornament. So Jetsun Shoki Geltsen wrote a commentary to the ornament, and the whole thing hasn't been translated, but a translation was made of chapter 4 for the basic program. Sugi, To Sugi, translated that chapter. But I think it's several hundred pages long. And again, we don't have time to go through all of that. So we have just an extract of that text just on the 37 practices, 37 harmonies. Yeah, so that's one thing too. You might, there's a text called The 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas by Tongme Zangpo. This is not the same thing, okay? The 37 harmonies and the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas are not the same. So anyway, so one of the files is Jetsun Shoki Geltsen's explanation of the 37 harmonies. And then another file is an extract from the study manual of that's used during the basic program. But again, just the portion about the 37 harmonies. So it's just it's kind of a simplified explanation of the 37 harmonies. And then the other file I sent is the Satipatthana Sutra, one translation of the Satipatthana Sutra, which is the Buddha's words on the 4 establishments of mindfulness, which are the first 4 of the 37 harmonies. So we might get into that. But I'm also going to rely a lot on this book, which is called Following in the Buddha's Footsteps. It's volume 4 of the series, The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. So in this book, the last 3 chapters contain quite a lot of information about the 37 harmonies, both from the Sanskrit tradition and also from the Pali tradition. I mean, we won't have time to go through all of it, but I'm going to mainly use this book, this explanation. So if you have a chance, you don't have to, but if you have a chance to get a copy of this book, that would be very helpful. Okay, so let's look at chapter 4 in general. We did do this last time in 70 topics, but just to review. No, not yet. Go back. Okay, so the definition. So this is a definition of application and complete aspects. So an application, again, is a bodhisattva's practice, but it's also a realization. So it's something in the mind of a bodhisattva. So the definition of application and complete aspects is a bodhisattva's yoga conjoined with a wisdom that collectively cultivates the aspects of the 3 exalted knowers. And there are 173 of these aspects. Don't worry, we're not going to go through all of them. Only 37. Okay, so let's look at this definition. So again, it's a bodhisattva's yoga, but a bodhisattva's yoga is a mental yoga, mental practice. Again, it's either just calm abiding itself or a union of calm abiding and special insight, depending on how accomplished the bodhisattva is. And so bodhisattvas engage in these yogas or these practices to overcome their obscurations, the obscurations in their mind, obscurations that prevent progressing on the path and eventually attaining enlightenment. And so that's their goal. Their goal is to reach enlightenment, but they have to clear away a lot of stuff, a lot of obscurations in the mind. And so that's the purpose of doing these yogas. And then it says it's conjoined with a wisdom that collectively cultivates the aspects of the 3 exalted knowers. So our teacher said that this yoga, this kind of yoga, could either be that wisdom itself, or it could be another kind of mind that's conjoined with or accompanied by or supported by that kind of wisdom. And that wisdom, it says, it collectively cultivates the aspects of the 3 exalted knowers. So again, there's 173 aspects, and a bodhisattva needs to learn all of these individually, like listen to teachings and study them, gain an understanding of them, and then meditate on them to gain proficiency in them. And collectively, the term collectively means that you put them all together under your observation and together with calm abiding and special insight. So I think the way it's done is, they learn all of these individually one by one, but then they develop the ability to hold them all in their mind at the same time. Like one example could be if you're a teacher, let's say you're a professor in a university and you have 173 students in your class, big classroom. So you can have all those students in your class at the same time. And if you know those students, you know each of them quite well. So then you can develop the ability to kind of keep them all in your mind. Something like that. Sounds kind of amazing, but bodhisattvas are amazing. The things they're able to do with their minds. Yeah, so that's basically what application and complete aspects is about. And then the 173 aspects are in different groups. They're related to the three exalted knowers, the first three, the topics of the first three chapters. So 27 aspects are related to the knower bases. 36 aspects are related to the knower paths. And then 110 aspects related to the exalted knower of all aspects, Buddha's mind, omniscient mind. And that's the category in which the 37 harmonies are included. So they're the first 37 of those 110. And then application and complete aspects. The last bullet point says it exists from the Mahayana path of accumulation. That's the first of the 5 Mahayana paths, all the way through the end of the continuum of a sentient being. That's the last moment just before enlightenment. So the Bodhisattva has been practicing a long time and has progressed through all the 10 grounds and is just at the last point before their mind is ready to transform into enlightened mind. So all along the path, from the path of accumulation right till that last moment, then the Bodhisattva has this practice of application and complete aspects. And then there are 11 topics in chapter 4. I'm not going to go through these now. I did go through them during the 70 topics. And I'm just going to focus on the first of the 11 topics because that's where we have the 37 harmonies. And this, so let's see what's on the next slide. I think it's an explanation of the term aspect. Yeah, I've always been somewhat perplexed by this term. It comes up a lot, for example, in Lorik, the study of mind and mental factors, minds and awarenesses. One context there is they say the mind arises in the aspect of the object. Like when we look at an object, we perceive an object with our visual consciousness, our eye consciousness. They say the mind actually takes on an aspect of the object, which always was hard for me to understand that. But that's one place where the term aspect comes up. And it probably does have different meanings in different contexts. But here, because we're talking about 173 aspects, in general, it has the meaning of an attribute or a feature. And here, meaning in the context of chapter 4, well, actually the ornament itself, in the context of the ornament, there are 2 types of aspects. Object aspects. So object aspects meaning objects of our mind, objects that we focus on and meditate on, like the 4 truths, the 4 noble truths, or the 4 truths of Aryas. Okay. So those are examples of object aspects. And then there's knower aspects. So knower aspects are minds or consciousnesses that observe the objects, like the 4 noble truths. And so examples of knower aspects would be the 3 exalted knowers. So those are minds, consciousnesses, awarenesses, realizations that observe, that apprehend, that realize the object aspects. So one of the, I think, yeah, the first of the 173 aspects is impermanence, specifically the impermanence of true sufferings, like our body, for example. Our body is an example of a true suffering. So the impermanence of our body. So that would be an object aspect. That's something to look at, to learn about, to meditate on, to realize. And so the Bodhisattva would develop a mind, consciousness that observes the impermanence of the body and gains a realization of that. Yeah. So in the context of the Ornament, chapter 4 of the Ornament, there are actually 173 object aspects, objects that are observed, meditated on, and then corresponding knower aspects, 173 knower aspects, minds that meditate on and realize those objects. But the main focus is on the knower aspects. Because a bodhisattva needs to generate these knower aspects in their mind. And they do so by means of learning about, thinking about, meditating on the 173 object aspects. I don't know if that makes any sense. Okay, so that's just in general the meaning of the term aspect. And now let's go on to look at topic 1 of chapter 4. That's the meaning of 4.1. Chapter 4, topic 1 is called Knower Aspects of the Antidotal Class. The definition of this is an exalted knower that is able to overcome its discordant class. So exalted knower, actually that's another term that is synonymous with path and ground and clear realization. So it's a mind, a consciousness, and it's exalted. It's not just an ordinary mind, but the mind of someone who's on the path, who's gained realizations. And so it's an exalted knower that is able to overcome its discordant class. So the term discordant class refers to erroneous states of mind, wrong states of mind. For example, thinking things are permanent, which are actually impermanent, but, you know, having this wrong view of things being permanent. So believing in permanence or grasping at permanence would be a discordant class. And then when we learn about impermanence and meditate on impermanence and finally gain a realization of impermanence, then that would be a knower, an exalted knower that is able to overcome that particular discordant class, that erroneous state of mind. And these erroneous states of mind are things that keep us stuck in samsara, in an unenlightened state, continuing to suffer and not being very helpful to others, maybe making others suffer too. And so this is what we want to get out of this situation. We want to get to enlightenment so we can help others and not make them suffer. And so we need to overcome, to eliminate all these discordant states of mind, these erroneous states of mind. So, yeah, so that's in general what is a knower aspect. And then it has 173 divisions, the 173 aspects as before, 27 related to knower bases, 36 related to knower paths, and then 110 aspects of an exalted knower of all aspects. So these 110 aspects of exalted knower, all aspects, strictly speaking, they only exist in the minds of Buddhas. Only Buddhas have those. However, other beings like bodhisattvas and also hearers and solitary realizers can have similar states of mind. Not the same as the Buddhas, but similar. So, for example, the first group of these 110 are, it's called the 37 aspects similar to those of hearers. So that's actually the 37 harmonies. And these 37 harmonies with enlightenment are practiced by hearers, they're practiced by solitary realizers, they're practiced by bodhisattvas. So all those three types of beings meditate on and cultivate, those particular realizations and have those realizations. They're not exactly the same as those in the mind of a Buddha, but they're similar, they're close. And the second group are 34 aspects similar to those of bodhisattvas. And so these would be realizations just of bodhisattvas that are similar to those of a Buddha. And included in them are the perfections, like the 10 perfections. Usually we hear about 6 perfections, but there's also actually 10 perfections. So the 10 perfections are states of mind that the bodhisattvas develop that are similar to minds that Buddhists have and enable them to reach that state of Buddhahood. And then the last, the 39 aspects that are uncommon. So uncommon means that only a Buddha has them. We don't find anything like that in the minds of hearers or solitary realizers or bodhisattvas. And so included in those are what are called 10 strengths or 10 powers of a Buddha. I did go through those in the 70 topics class, just to give you some idea of some of the qualities that a Buddha has that no one else has, unshared by anyone else. So, okay, so that's just an overview of the 173 aspects. And as I say, what I'm going to be doing from now on is just focusing on the 37, they're called the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, but they are the third from the bottom, the 37 aspects similar to those of the Buddha. So that's where they're found in the ornament within these 173 aspects. Any questions so far? Anything? I'm going kind of fast. Anything you feel out of breath, left behind?
Did you already say what the antidotal class was?
Well, I think it's because in the definition of these knower aspects, the knower aspects are, it says they overcome the discordant class. So they are antidotes. I think that's the meaning. Each of these knower aspects is an antidote to at least one or more erroneous state of mind. Anyone there have a question?
SK, I think there's a question in the chat about the following in the footsteps of the Buddha, or the title of that book.
Yeah, the title is Following. This is what it looks like. Can you see it? Following in the Footsteps of the Buddha. And it's by the Dalai Lama with Tupten children. And this is part of a series of books published by Wisdom. The whole series is called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And this is number 4 in the series. So you can, if you just get the name, go online. I know there's a Kindle version. If you're not able to get the book, or you don't want to get the book, or you can't afford to get the book, that's fine. I'm going to be taking material from it and explaining it to you, and sometimes reading things from the book and putting it in the slides and so on. But it's just contains a really excellent explanation of these 37 harmonies with enlightenment. It also has wonderful information about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, 3 jewels of refuge, the meaning of refuge, and then the 3 higher trainings in ethics, concentration, wisdom. So this topic, 37 harmonies, comes in the context of the higher training of wisdom. So it's not easy to find information about these 37 harmonies. So even in the materials from the basic program, like this text of Jetsun Shoki Gyaltsen's, which is a commentary to the Ornament, it gives just basic information about the 37 harmonies, but not a whole lot about how to actually practice them. So this book contains a lot more information about that, how to practice the 37. Anyone else? Well, there'll hopefully be time later at the end for more questions. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Got some material on the 37 harmonies. The next one. Okay, so these 37 are practiced in both the Pali and the Sanskrit traditions. So there's a number of Pali sutras in which they are explained. Also some Sanskrit sutras, mainly the Sutra on the 10 Grounds, the Dasabhumi Sutra. So that has an explanation of these 37. And they also appear in some of the texts of the Nalanda tradition, such as this one, Ornament for Clear Realization, and also Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha, the Treasury of Knowledge. They also come up in Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, just briefly mentioned in chapter 4 of that text. That's just to show they're there in both traditions. And in this book, Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, on page 305, His Holiness says that it's unfortunate that some practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism do not pay adequate attention to these 37. So he says, while the 37 harmonies are explained in Mahayana sutras and commentaries, they are not widely practiced among followers of the Tibetan tradition. This may be due to the fact that in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, these 37 practices are correlated with the levels of the 5 paths. This is something we'll see in the next slide. And so people think that they are to be done later after they have attained a path. However, I read a sutra that explained how to include them in our daily practice, even at the beginner's level. I would like to encourage Tibetan Buddhists to do these practices, especially the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Okay, so this is His Holiness, okay, encouraging us followers of Tibetan Buddhism to do these practices, especially the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So those are the first 4 of the 37. And I actually plan to spend most of the time talking about those 4 because they are very, very important. And then His Holiness says they can be meditated upon with a bodhicitta motivation and the prasangika view of emptiness. So that's how we can make them Mahayana practices. The motivation and view of emptiness. The next bullet point says, so why are they called harmonies with enlightenment? So it's because they are requisites for the attainment of enlightenment. And enlightenment here doesn't just mean Buddhahood, like the full enlightenment of a Buddha, but both hearers and solitary realizers who strive for nirvana. So their goal, their nirvana, is also called enlightenment. So there's actually 3 kinds of enlightenment of the 3 vehicles. And so these 37 are necessary in order to attain any of the 3 types of enlightenment. And they are conducive to enlightenment or awakening. Then the third point says they contain elements of all 3 higher trainings. So the 3 higher trainings, in case you don't know, are the higher training of ethics, the higher training of concentration, and the higher training of wisdom. And the term higher training means when you engage in those practices with the motivation of renunciation or the determination to be free of samsara. So if you have that strong feeling that I have to get out of samsara, I have to free myself from samsara, and what do I do? How do I do it? Then those are the 3 main things you practice: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So if you practice those with the motivation of getting out of samsara, that's when they become the higher trainings of those 3. And the bodhisattvas, they're also included in bodhisattva practices and the 6 perfections. So among the 6 perfections, number 2 is the perfection of ethics. Number 5, the perfection of concentration. Number 6, the perfection of wisdom. So bodhisattvas also practice ethics, concentration, and wisdom, but they do so not just to free themselves from samsara, but to reach full enlightenment, Buddhahood, to help all sentient beings be free of samsara. So you find those 3 kinds of practices in both the path for attaining nirvana and the path for attaining enlightenment. And these 37 harmonies contain elements for those 3 types of practices. And they all cultivate directly or indirectly the wisdom that realizes the 4 truths of Aryas and the ultimate nature of reality. So His Holiness in this book says, in the structure of the stages of the path, in other words, the Lamrim, the 37 harmonies with awakening are described under the path of the middle level practitioner. So the middle scope of the Lamrim. That's where they're namely explained. However, they can also be done with the bodhicitta motivation, in which case they become the path of advanced practitioners and lead to full awakening. So again, these are essential practices for bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas need to practice them too, and they would do so with the motivation of bodhicitta to reach full enlightenment, full awakening, to benefit all living beings. And then he says the 37 harmonies are also referenced in the Vajrayana Tantra, where, for example, they are symbolized by Yamantaka's 34 arms and body, speech, and mind. So if you're familiar with Yamantaka, he has 34 arms. So those represent 34 of the 37 practices, and then the body, speech, and mind are the remaining 3. So the next slide gives an overview of the 37. So they're divided into 7 groups. And each group, as shown on this chart, has a different kind of description of what its function is. And also a place on the path where it is like fully attained. So the first group is the 4 close placements of mindfulness. Sometimes these are called the 4 foundations of mindfulness or the 4 establishments of mindfulness. These are a very important practice in the Theravada tradition. There's a lot of books about them and a lot of information on how to practice them in the Theravada tradition. And so the description of this is these are the path that thoroughly investigates things. So that's what we do when we practice the 4 close placements of mindfulness. We investigate mainly the body, feelings, the mind, and phenomena. So those are the 4 objects that we are mindful of, that we investigate. And it's said that the full attainment of this kind of practice is on the small level of the path of accumulation. So the path of accumulation, that's the first of the Bodhisattva's paths, or the first of any practitioner's path. And it has 3 levels called the small and the middle and the great. So this is, I think, what His Holiness mentioned, that, some people will look at this and say, oh, I'm nowhere near the path of accumulation, so I won't practice that. But then how are you going to get there if you don't practice it? You have to start somewhere. So you have to start practicing the 4 close placements of mindfulness. And then by practicing it, you're creating the cause to have the culmination or the full attainment of it when you're on the path of accumulation. And then the second group are called 4 correct abandonings. So like I said, I'm mainly going to focus on that first group, the 4 close placements of mindfulness. There's a huge amount of material involved in that. In fact, we probably don't even have time to cover all of it, but I'll do as much as I can. And it's very, very useful, very practical. And then I will, before we end the course, I will go through the other groups, at least, mention what's included in them. So the 4 correct abandonings, the second group, and that's called a path that arises from effort. And that's attained on the middle level of the path of accumulation. Number 3 is the 4 legs of magical emanation. That's the path that is thoroughly trained in meditative concentration. And that's achieved on the great level of the path of accumulation. And then number 4, the 5 powers, the path that prepares for clear realizations. That's on the first 2 levels of the path of preparation, heat and peak levels. And the 5th group are the 5 strengths. The 5 powers and the 5 strengths are actually the same. I can't remember all of them, but they include things like faith and also mindfulness. So they're actually the same elements, but, at one point they're called powers, another point they're called strengths. I can't remember right now what the difference is, but since the 5 strengths, the second group is achieved on the 2 higher levels of the path of preparation. So that's like expanded attainments of those 5 things. And number 6, the 7 branches of enlightenment. And this is called the path of clear realizations. And those are achieved on the path of seeing. The 8th group is, the 7th group is called the 8 branches of Arya paths. So these are actually the 8-fold path, the Noble Eightfold Path, which the Buddha explained in his very first discourse, first turning of the wheel of Dharma. And these are taught and practiced a lot in the Theravada tradition. So here, again, it says these are attained on the path of meditation. So that's very high level. But again, in the Theravada tradition, even beginners start learning about these and practicing them. So it makes sense that we at least start practicing them now and then eventually reach the state of culmination at a higher level of the path. Okay, so that's just an overview of the 37. And then we'll go through them one group at a time. So again, we'll start with the 4 close placements of mindfulness. And before we get into that, the next slide is just to look at the term mindfulness, because there's a lot of talk nowadays about mindfulness, and it's become very well known and popular. And I even found it in my computer's dictionary. So the dictionary that is on my computer has a definition of mindfulness that says, a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations, used as a therapeutic technique. So I think it's wonderful that mindfulness has become so practiced, so popular, because I think it does bring a lot of benefit to many people. For example, dealing with pain, dealing with stress, dealing with anxiety, dealing with sleep disorders, eating disorders. So it's used in a lot of different applications. But this, that definition I just read isn't quite the meaning of mindfulness in Buddhism. So mindfulness has sort of been extracted from Buddhism and then used in these other applications, these other contexts. But it's good to look at what it actually means in Buddhism. But even in Buddhism, you can find the term used in different ways, in different contexts. So it is difficult. But in the Tibetan tradition, they rely mainly on the texts of Sangye, especially his text, the Abhidharma Samuccaya, Compendium of Knowledge. So in that text, it explains all the mental factors, mind and mental factors. So mindfulness is a mental factor. So this explanation comes from Sangye's text. So it's a mental factor that has 3 features. First, its focal object is something familiar, something we are familiar with. So, for example, many people practice mindfulness of breathing. That's a very popular way of applying mindfulness, paying attention to your breathing. And so the more we do that kind of practice, paying attention to our breathing, then the more our mind becomes familiar with the breathing. Yeah. Like everybody's breathing all the time, but not everybody is really paying attention to their breathing. So in the practice of mindfulness of the breathing, we are deliberately paying attention to the breath and really trying to stay with the breath as it's coming in and going out. And so in that way, our mind gets very familiar with the breath. The breath becomes a very familiar object. And the same, if we're doing another kind of practice, like a visualization practice, visualizing the Buddha or visualizing Tara or Chenrezig. So if we do that practice again and again, like many people would do it every day, then that object becomes familiar. So mindfulness has an object that is familiar. And the second feature is the mind doesn't forget the object. That doesn't mean ever. Okay, it doesn't mean it will never forget the object, but it means that while mindfulness is present and active and functioning, the mind will not forget the object. The mind will stay with the object and not wander elsewhere. But of course, as we know, when we try to meditate, the mind eventually does forget the object and wander away and get lost in something else. So when our mind is on our meditation object, staying on the meditation object, even if it's just a few seconds, so at those times, mindfulness is there. Mindfulness is present. Mindfulness is functioning, active. But if we forget the object and get lost in thoughts, memories, and whatever, that means our mindfulness has slipped. Mindfulness has dropped. But we can always pick it up again, fortunately. And then the third feature is the function. The function of mindfulness is to prevent distraction. So, unfortunately, we wish to meditate. We wish to be able to train our mind and keep our mind in a good state and on a virtuous object. But our mind has very strong habits, such as, thinking about this and that and remembering things from the past and fantasizing and worrying and so on and so forth. And so it's very hard to keep our mind on an object for any length of time. So when those kind of thoughts come up and our mind goes to them, we forget our meditation object. That means we've lost our mindfulness. We've sort of dropped mindfulness. Mindfulness has ceased temporarily. But we can notice that. And when we notice that our mind has wandered away, we can bring it back to the object. So that means mindfulness has been renewed, has been reactivated. So that's the function of mindfulness, is to prevent the mind from going elsewhere, away from the meditation object. So we all have mindfulness. It is a natural quality of our mind. It's a mental factor in everybody's minds. But in some people, it may be weak, but it is possible to strengthen it, to build it up, just like going to the gym, mindfulness gym, and working on that muscle of mindfulness so that it becomes stronger. And then we'll be able to keep our mind focused on an object of meditation, or in other contexts as well, listening to teachings or driving. We certainly need mindfulness when we're driving to avoid accidents. So it's something we can cultivate, build up, increase, make stronger. And then the second part of this slide, it says it plays an important role in all three higher trainings. Again, the three higher trainings: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So in the popular ideas about mindfulness, people sometimes think mindfulness is just being in the present, just being aware of what's happening in this moment. And I think some people also think it doesn't involve any thought, no thinking, no conceptualization, just present moment awareness. But it is more than that in Buddhism anyway, in the context of Buddhism, because just being aware in the present moment, that's not going to get us to enlightenment. Our goal in Buddhism is to reach enlightenment. And on the way to reach these higher states of mind, higher realizations. And so we need more than just being in the present moment. So mindfulness, actually, I was thinking it's a bit like a multi-purpose tool, like maybe a Swiss Army knife, that has all these different blades, and you can use it to, open a can or cut a piece of rope or, sewing. So it's a bit like that. It has different functions, different roles that it can play, different ways it can be used. So just some examples here. First, higher training is ethics. And so ethics basically means refraining from things that are non-virtuous, like killing and stealing and so on, non-virtuous actions. And also many of us take precepts. There's lay precepts, the 5 precepts, there's monastic precepts. And so mindfulness, in this case, means remembering, keeping in mind, and not forgetting what precepts we have taken. And even if you haven't taken precepts, what kind of actions are virtuous, what kind of actions are non-virtuous. Yeah, so remembering those things, keeping those in mind, not forgetting them. Otherwise, we might follow our old habits, like swatting mosquitoes, or when we're talking to people, we may exaggerate. We're telling a story about something that happened and we might exaggerate it, or we might speak in ways that are hurtful, nasty, and so on. And so this is what can happen if we don't have mindfulness. But mindfulness enables us to keep in mind what we've heard, provided we have heard teachings on karma, for example, and the 10 non-virtuous actions, the 10 virtuous actions. So we learn those things, and we need to keep those things in our mind so that in our daily life, especially when we're interacting with other people and other living beings, we need to remember. So, even if our hand is raised about to slap a mosquito on our arm, we'll remember, Buddha said that is non-virtuous. That's causing suffering to that being, and also, creating bad karma. So I'll suffer in the future. So that means mindfulness is operating. We are remembering and not forgetting what we have learned about karma. Or in the case of taking precepts, I took a precept to not kill. I promised the Buddha I was not going to kill. So I can't do that. Yeah. So when that kind of thing happens, then that shows mindfulness is working. So mindfulness then is a protection. It protects us from creating non-virtue, creating bad karma, creating the cause of suffering for ourselves and also for others. Okay, then in the concentration, the second higher training is concentration. So in developing concentration, mindfulness has a very important role. It's essential to have concentration because it enables us to not forget our meditation object, to develop concentration, like calm abiding, practice of calm abiding or serenity. We have an object that we choose. It could be the breath, it could be a visualization of the Buddha. And we train our mind to stay on that object and bring it back when it wanders away. So again, when our mind is on the object, not forgetting the object, staying with the object, that's mindfulness. Mindfulness is like glue. They actually call it like a rope. In the teaching, the traditional teachings, they use the analogy of taming an elephant, a wild, untamed elephant. So first you need a rope to tie the elephant to a post so it doesn't run away. So they say mindfulness is like that rope that's tying the mind to an object. We could think of it as a rope or glue sticking to the object to not forget it. And in that way, then the mind learns concentration, trains in concentration. So without mindfulness, no way we can attain calm abiding, single point of concentration. Then wisdom, the third higher training, which is the most important one, because what keeps us stuck in samsara is basically ignorance about the true nature of things, how things really exist. So we need to develop the wisdom about how things do exist to counteract that ignorance. So in the cultivation of wisdom, mindfulness is also crucial. It enables again the mind to be stuck to the object, to continue focusing on the object that we're analyzing. Because to develop wisdom, let's say just the wisdom of impermanence, that's relatively easy compared to the wisdom of emptiness. In order to understand impermanence, we would focus on an object like our body, for example. We would think about our body and contemplate how it's not permanent, it's not fixed, it's not static, frozen, it's changing all the time. So we would take an object and focus on that object and then contemplate the impermanence, the changing nature of that object. And so to be able to generate the wisdom that understands that, we need to be able to keep our mind focused on the object. If our mind is wandering all over the place, every 2 seconds it's jumping to something else, then it becomes very difficult to develop what they sometimes call it penetrative wisdom, being able to penetrate through our wrong conceptions, our habitual wrong ways of seeing things, like seeing things as permanent, seeing things as truly existing. So we have to be able to penetrate those, to go through those and see the object as it really exists. And so it's very important to be able to keep the mind focused on that object while we're doing this kind of analysis to generate wisdom. And also, once one does gain an insight, a realization into the nature of an object, then one needs to keep mindfulness on that. Yeah, hold the mind on that insight, that realization. So it becomes more and more familiar. Yeah, let's just read a little bit more from this book, what His Holiness says about mindfulness. There's actually, if you do have a copy of this book, in chapter 11, this is where it's introducing the 37 harmonies with awakening. And there's quite a bit of explanation about mindfulness and introspective awareness. And it's very helpful because, like I say, this word mindfulness is being used so much, and it can be quite confusing to understand what exactly mindfulness is. So this explains mindfulness as it's understood in Buddhism, and differentiating it from the way it's talked about, the way that term is used in contemporary world. So here's some other ways of using mindfulness. Mindfulness reminds us of the goals of spiritual practice, attaining fortunate rebirths, liberation, and full awakening. And then, like I was just saying, how it functions in the practice of ethics and concentration and wisdom. And then in daily life, mindfulness remembers what has been done and what needs to be done. It distinguishes what is worthy of our attention and what is not. The Buddha compared mindfulness to a gatekeeper that safeguards what is important. So here's a quotation from a sutra from the Pali Canon. Just as the royal frontier fortress has a gatekeeper, wise, experienced, intelligent, to keep out those he doesn't know and to let in those he does, for the protection of those within and to ward off those without. In the same way, an Arya disciple is mindful, highly meticulous, remembering and able to call to mind even things that were done and said long ago. With mindfulness as his gatekeeper, the Arya disciple abandons what is unskillful, develops what is skillful, abandons what is blameworthy, develops what is blameless, and looks after himself with purity. So there's different ways that we use mindfulness and practice mindfulness. And yeah, it's very important. I'll say more about it in other classes in the future to have a better understanding of mindfulness. But we have a little bit of time left, and I had a couple more slides kind of going into specifically the close placement of mindfulness. The next slide. Yeah. So that was an explanation of mindfulness in general, the mental factor of mindfulness. But then when talking about the close placements of mindfulness, this is a more specific kind of mindfulness, or a way of the way that mindfulness is used. So, like I say, this book, Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, the way that the 4 close placements of mindfulness is explained is from both traditions, the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, meaning the Tibetan tradition, based on the Indian tradition. And and my impression is that the way the 4 are explained in the Tibetan tradition, Sanskrit tradition, seems to be a more advanced way of practicing them. Whereas in the Pali tradition, well, for example, modern day Theravada tradition, these 4 are practiced widely and taught even to beginners. And my impression is it's more practical. For example, right from the beginning, you start with mindfulness of the breathing. I think this is very suitable for especially us people in the West and in modern times, because our minds tend to be very scattered, very busy, and very hard to control. And so I think mindfulness practiced with the breathing and also with the body, paying attention to our body, bodily postures, and so on, is very helpful to at least start to slow down and calm down and make the mind more clear and more focused, so that it can then be used for other things. And so what I thought to do in this course is to combine, I'll explain both traditions of these 4 establishments, or 4 close placements of mindfulness, and also how to practice them. And, we'll do some practices together, because I want this to be not just an intellectual study, but something practical exercises. And they're very helpful. They are very helpful if we can incorporate them in our life and in our practice. So here there's a definition of the close placements of mindfulness. This is from Jetsun Chukyi Gelson's text, his commentary on the Ornament. So we'll just look at it for now, and we can come back to it later if we find any part of it that doesn't make sense. So the definition of a close placement of mindfulness is an exalted knower of one who has entered a path. So again, he's talking about a high level, the point at which, it's actually been attained or realized rather than right from the beginning. But we have to start. We won't be able to get there if we don't start somewhere. So the actual close placement of mindfulness then is an exalted knower of one who has entered a path, included within either mindfulness or wisdom, that meditates on the four: bodies, feelings, minds, and phenomena, through examining the specific and general characteristics of each. So there's a lot of words there, but basically then it's like, to start with, we're not at the point of actually realizing this, but to start with, we meditate on the four objects. There's four different objects for cultivating mindfulness, the close placements of mindfulness: the body, feelings, minds, and phenomena. We'll later in future courses look at what is included in all of those. And in this tradition, in the Sanskrit tradition, the way of meditating on these four objects is by examining specific and general characteristics of each of them. So on the next slide, we'll just look at what those specific and general characteristics are. So each of the four objects has a specific characteristic. For the body, the characteristic is impurity. So this is one of the practices that Western people just love. We love hearing about this and meditating on it. I'm joking, of course. In fact, some teachers avoid talking about it because students have such a reaction. No, what are you talking about? My body is not impure. Anyway, so we'll look at that. But yeah, it doesn't mean the body is bad. It doesn't mean we should hate our body and feel our body is disgusting. But it's just realistic. What's inside, what's underneath the skin. Yeah, look at all those things. Are they really beautiful? Are they really worth being attached to? Even the skin itself. You may have seen photos of, what the skin looks like under a microscope. Yeah, super powerful microscope. Yeah, you get quite a different view, quite a different impression of skin when you look at it like that. There's little creatures. There's little creatures living in the pores of our skin. So anyway, and the whole purpose of this is to overcome afflictions, to overcome delusions, to overcome discordant classes like being attached to the body. This is one of the biggest attachments we have, maybe the biggest attachment we have. And it's what keeps us in samsara. So as long as we're attached to our body, fantasizing it is something wonderful and worthy of being attached to, then we're stuck in samsara. So that's the whole purpose. The whole purpose is to overcome that attachment and develop a cool, calm, balanced state of mind with regard to the body. So we'll get into that more later. And then number two, so feelings, the second object, the specific characteristic of feelings is suffering, or maybe better to say unsatisfactoriness. Like, we like pleasant feelings, but how long do they last? We would like them to be there all the time, every minute, every second, but are we able to do that? So if we're attached to feelings and chasing after pleasant ones and trying to escape from unpleasant ones, there's a lot of suffering, a lot of unsatisfactoriness in there. And then with the mind, the third object is the mind. So the impermanence of the mind. body is also impermanent, feelings are also impermanent, but I guess when focusing on the mind, the specific characteristic to contemplate is how it is impermanent, changing all the time. And then phenomena, other phenomena not included in those first three, selflessness, absence of a self. So each of the four objects has specific characteristics that are meditated upon, but then there's also general characteristics that apply to all four. So the general characteristics are impermanent. So again, all four of those objects are impermanent, suffering or unsatisfactory, not fully satisfying. As long as we're in samsara, of course, a Buddha's body is a different matter. Buddha's body is not impure and suffering and so on, but we're talking about ordinary bodies, samsaric bodies and so on. And then empty and selfless. So this is just an introduction to the way it's explained in the Sanskrit tradition. But like I say, my impression is that it might be better to start with the way it's explained in the Pali tradition. It's more accessible. We start with that, and there's a lot of overlap. It's not that they're totally different, but I just think it's more accessible and more practical the way it's explained in the Pali tradition. For example, the very first practice, and this is from the Buddha's Sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra, the Establishments of Mindfulness Sutra. The very first practice is to sit down in a quiet place, calm down, and focus on your breathing. And then from there, you go on to do other practices. But like I say, I think for us, for many of us in the West, this is a very good place to start. Mindfulness of the breathing. And in fact, the Buddha himself, in the Pali Sutras, the Buddha himself did a lot of practice of mindfulness of breathing. Even after becoming a Buddha, he continued doing that practice and really praised that practice. So that's probably enough for tonight. Also, just one other thing, because I think some of you wish to do this course as part of the basic program and eventually finish the basic program and have the certificate. So there will be an exam or test, maybe better to say test, at the end, at the conclusion. It's totally optional, just for those who would like to do it. But I also thought to have a weekly quiz, just a couple of questions related to what we learn each week. And I'm not sure how to do that. I guess I can communicate with Venerable Dundrup. I'll just I'll make a file of the questions and then send it to him, and he can put it on the website or email it to you, those who want to receive it. And then the quizzes, the questions on the quizzes will help to prepare for the test at the end. This is how we did it in the master's program, and it was very helpful, just so you have some idea of what's coming at the end, what kind of questions will be asked, what kind of things to study. So again, it's totally optional, but for those who would like to do that, that's my plan. So any final questions before we finish?
You mentioned that 37 harmonies were in the Lam Rim and the middle scope. Is that right?
Well, that was what His Holiness said. I don't think he said they were in the Lam Rim, but that's the place where they would fit. Where they would fit, in the context of the middle scope. Because like in this book, they're explained in the context of the higher training of wisdom, which is, the 3 higher trainings in the middle scope. I have never seen them, and they might be there.
Yeah, I can't find them.
I've never seen them there. No, I think he simply means that that's the place where they would belong. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think just in my experience, like the prayer for taking the 8 Mahayana precepts, you know, not the prayer, the ceremony for taking the 8 Mahayana precepts. There's a mention in there of the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, but I can't remember any other place we've actually encountered the 37 harmonies in our usual texts and materials and prayers and so on. So they're obviously an important part of the path, but you don't find so much mention of them. I mean, they do come, like I said, in the ornament. So the monks and nuns in the monasteries who are studying, doing the Geshe studies, they would encounter them in the ornament, and in Chandrakirtis, entering the middle way. So those who are doing the philosophical studies would encounter them, but like in the Lam Rim and in our normal daily practices and prayers and so on, they're usually not mentioned much. So that's why I was quite happy in the master's program to finally get more information about them, learn more about these things. Okay, anyone else?
You said thorough investigation is the method, examining the specific and general characteristics of each of the 4 establishments.
Mm-hmm.
The method of meditating in the Sanskrit tradition. Is that like examining? Is that observation, or is that conceptual activity?
It would involve some conceptual activity, yeah, to understand, you know, like the body, you know, to think about the different parts of the body, and are they really pure? Are they really worth being attached to? Yeah.
Like an analytic meditation.
Analytical meditation. But then I think once you reach some conclusion or some experience, like, oh yeah, this body isn't really worth being attached to, then you could stop thinking and just focus on that. I mean, I think it's the same when I read about the in the Pali tradition. There's also a certain amount of contemplation. More, I mean, they may not use the word analytical meditation, but it does seem to be using conceptual thought. I mean, just to think about the different parts of the body and what they're made of, and what, you know, how long do they last and so on. You do need to use a certain amount of thought, conceptual thought. I don't think just by looking at your hand, you know, looking at your skin, you're going to get that same kind of understanding. So let's stop for tonight, and we'll close with the dedication verses, dedicating the merit. So feel confident that we have created merit just by coming together with the positive motivation, spending this time listening to the teachings for the benefit of all living beings. So we have definitely created a lot of merit, a lot of positive energy. So now we share this with all other beings, dedicating to enlightenment so that we can help all living beings reach enlightenment. And we'll also dedicate for the long lives of our precious spiritual teachers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and serene attentive counsel, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's mortal way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.